Rick Agraval and his wife started e-commerce superstar The Meatbox and had a stellar exit. But to kick this conversation off, I ask a super provocative question. That 2017, you were funding the growth of the business and you took the massive decision of selling your home to enable you to grow. How did you manage to convince your wife that was a good idea? They pioneered many things in New Zealand, not the least of which was the cold chain, and this carried with it many, many risks.
We had one day where we had $20,000 worth of products go missing in the network, and Enterprise like, hey, sorry guys, this is it's your exposure, not ours.
I always maintain, do hard things, and those challenges of course can either destroy or define you. In Rick's case, they were very clear.
Doing that meant that we had to do double shifts. We were virtually running, a 24-hour operation, staff morale, our morale. It was really difficult, but wouldn't change it.
Rick and his wife then made what turned out, in hindsight, to be a hugely advantageous timing decision.
So why don't we take it to market? Hey, worst case, we hang on to it. No one comes knocking on the door. Best case, it could be a life-changing, defining moment for us.
The manifestation of that timing was what happened next.
He presented 3 buyers a week later. One just loved the business, made an offer a week following that.
Where did you land from a EBIT multiple perspective?
Yeah. So we ended up...
Rick now specializes in helping other e-commerce founders build amazing businesses. And this is the start of a bit of a masterclass that you really do want to hear.
A lot of business owners are shocked when they find out what your opening margin should look like to run a profitable, lucrative, cash flow generating business.
What should it look like?
For e-com, it needs to be...
Rick Agraval, welcome to the show.
Excited to be here. Thanks so much for having me, Josh.
So one of the things our researchers dug up is that 2017, you were funding the growth of the business and you took the massive decision of selling your home to enable you to grow. How did you manage to convince your wife that was a good idea?
I'm probably really lucky in the sense that I've got a very entrepreneurial wife, and full disclaimer, she was the co-founder with me, and she's very much growth focused and pragmatic when it comes to those things. So the decision, or the conversation rather, really was, how do we actually fund the growth of the business without having to go cap in hand to the bank or go down the equity raising route and maintain full control and keep it ours. It also helped that the market was really hot in terms of real estate at the time, and kind of glossed it over with the fact that, hey, let's sell now. The market will crash, we'll buy in and get an absolute steal, which it didn't, but it helped make that decision easier at the time anyway.
Did you go back and buy the same sort of home again later on when you had the funds to do so?
No. Next time we came around to buying a house, we had 2 young kids.
Right.
So we bought something a bit more fit for purpose in a different part of the city, which in hindsight wouldn't change a thing.
Yeah,
Worked
great.
out really well.
There's a famous story that Sylvester Stallone, when he had the Rocky script, he was pitching it around town and he wanted to star and direct in it, and everyone offered to buy the script from him, and he ran out of money. And so he sold his dog to a local guy down the road to be able to eat, and then he got the funding for it, and he famously had to buy his dog back for $20,000 from this guy because the guy saw that he'd become famous and rich in the background. So that's why I asked, did you buy the same thing for 20 grand more?
No.
Clearly not.
That's a great story.
Yeah, it is a great story. So you started a subscription meat box, plus also one-off purchases in the meat box. And so at that point in time, that wasn't something that was kind of trending or around. So how did you spot that opportunity?
Yeah, great question. We started off one-off, and it eventually turned to subscription. So we didn't start a subscription from day one, but to rewind all the way back to 2015 when we started it, very different landscape. Not what people are familiar with seeing now. Not just subscription and e-commerce being part of your everyday purchasing behavior. It was also sending something that was perishable and chilled through an ambient network, which is a courier network, to your door. So very much a lot of objections to overcome before even getting someone to pay for an order. But the idea spawned really from, me and my wife were working in a wholesale capacity for a wholesaler going into restaurants, hotels, food service operators, but a bit more of a premium product, had more provenance. You understood where it was from, what kind of life the animal had, et cetera, et cetera. So it had a little bit of a point of difference, but that was wholesale. And then what we found is going along to barbecue get-togethers or Christmas, friends and family would always be like, "This is phenomenal. Where can I actually find this? Why doesn't my corner store butcher or the supermarket have this?" And it kind of just, yeah, it just made itself so obvious to us, that that is something that needs to go direct to consumer. We didn't want to do a corner store butchery. Neither of us were actually butchers. We didn't have the appetite to open the doors 7 days a week and serve our local catchment of a couple of suburbs. We wanted to get scale. We wanted to serve the masses essentially. So we saw online as the obvious vehicle to do that. But online was very different back then. Shopify wasn't even really a thing. People were very skeptical about purchasing online. My food bag had recently kicked off and that was starting to get some traction. But in terms of online butcheries, it was slim to nil.
Yeah, I'm not an expert in meat nor FMCG, but if I think about the meat buying experience, one of the things is that at the butcher, you literally see the cut of meat and you choose that cut of meat that you want down to the piece of steak. And in the supermarket, the same thing should be true. It's inside a plastic wrapper and you can see it. I'm imagining that would have been one of the early challenges that you had to get over. But what are a couple of the other ones that you had to navigate your way through in the very early days to convince people to change their consumer behavior, which is a hard thing to do, from physically going to the place, buying it, to being comfortable to get sent pre-selected cuts of meat that they wouldn't have necessarily had the hand in choosing themselves?
Mm, you're right. It's really that skepticism that we had to get past. Is it going to get warm in transit? How are you keeping it cold? How do I know it's better than the supermarket or my butcher? I love my butcher. I support my local butcher. He, lives in our community. There were all those things to move past, but the biggest thing that we really pressed on as part of our marketing strategy was, you know, every product or service needs a villain, to agitate that pain point, that whole PAS formula, pain, agitation, solution. And it was like, you know, why are you buying supermarket meat? Because there's absolutely nothing. This is the marketing, not fact. There's nothing exciting about it. You don't know where it's from. You don't know whether your beef or your steak's been aged appropriately. It's more than likely you're not getting what you deserve with the price point. Why don't you pay a fraction more and get something purely premium and unforgettable? And we leaned into that with the storytelling, leaned into that with the type of photography and positioning for the product as well. We went on farm and captured footage on farm and just helped that storytelling piece. So we brought people on that journey. So by the time it came time to going, hey, here, purchase or buy the product, it was a no-brainer. But that's now in retrospect, that was a bit of a longer journey to start with,
Yeah,
definitely.
yeah. I had a repeated experience of negative produce from the large Australian grocery retailer. And I put a post on LinkedIn, and we, as a consequence, became a customer of the Wonky Box, which is the odds and ends vegetables
Yes.
and fruit, and the meat box. And so this is about 5 years ago. And so we took that leap of faith, but it was $100, I think it was, for the mixed meat box. And I remember thinking two things happened at the time. Firstly, it was actually phenomenal value compared to what we were paying at the supermarket at a retail price point for the product that we had. Secondly, the product was super high. So the product quality was super high. And thirdly, you got me back into sirloin steaks, which I hadn't eaten for the longest of times. And it took me a couple of goes to get the cooking of it right. But my experience was that it was a high quality product at a much, much better price point, and we became super happy customers for a period of time. What kind of early lessons did you learn about your customer behavior, like from a repeat, subscription-y kind of standpoint that you didn't know when you went into that business?
Yeah, good question. Thanks for supporting us in those earlier
It's a
days.
pleasure.
Thank you. Um, I think outside of before tackling subscription, I think given our demographic or our target customer or customer persona, they're a little bit more far along on the age curve. So we're typically targeting 40-year-olds and above for the most part before we got a bit more penetration of mass market. and the nostalgia of what steaks used to taste like, what a sirloin used to taste like, a nice dry aged sirloin with that beautiful cap of fat on top that just preserved the flavor and moisture, versus something that you get in the supermarket that you don't know how it's been graded, because meat goes through the abattoirs and gets graded based on a number of different things. But a lot of the time you get whatever was available at a spot rate that day on the supermarket shelf. So leaning into that and going, you know, pressing that nostalgic kind of button and going, what do you remember it being like? Because what you see at the supermarket shelf isn't what you used to have back in the day growing up. So that was a big one. In terms of subscription, the first touch point for a customer jumping on subscription is a bit of an ask. Like you said, it was $100 investment for a box. That's for one box. Doing that every week or fortnight or month is a little bit more of an ask. So typically waiting till someone's actually come in the door, had that first purchase, had that repeat purchase, and then really being front-footed around, this is the subscription offering, this is the incentive to jump on it. You know how good it is, so you're not going to be disappointed. It just takes that element of, will I be burned away? And am I over-investing into something that's pretty homogenous with what I'll find at the butchery?
Yeah, yeah. You mentioned in around about the time that you sold the home to fund the growth of the business, that you also made the decision to bring marketing capability in-house, and you'd had some, let's call it mixed experiences in dealing with agencies. So what made you get to that point of going, we need to own this kind of capability ourselves? And then what did you do to make it something which you excelled at?
Yeah, I think a lot of businesses have this experience, especially when you're bootstrapped, when you're using your own money, when you've self-funded it, whether you've sold your house or otherwise. You're watching every penny going out the door, and you're looking at every penny going out the door going, what's the ROI coming back on that penny being spent? And when you start working with agencies, you get to a point where you've hit a little bit of a growth ceiling, and you're like, okay, what's that next stage of growth look like for us, and how are we going to get there? And then you start having those conversations or discussions with agencies and so forth around paid media. And look, it's probably generalizing, but for the most part, we found agencies to be pretty underwhelming for the investment you were making, particularly at that time. Anyway, um, so again, a big part of me thought, look, we've made all this sacrifice. I haven't paid myself a salary at this point from the business. It's all been reinvested into the business. I'm not going to sit idle and watch, a 5K retainer go out the door every month if it's not absolutely being delivered on. So I thought, okay, well, to keep these guys accountable, I'll just start learning myself. So when we're having these conversations once a month, I can ask the good questions, so we're getting the right answers back, and keep these guys honest. And as I did that,
Hi, it's Josh. Thanks for listening to the show. When founders talk about the dream exit, they're really talking about freedom. Freedom to choose how to use their time and to decide what comes next. As a client of JB Ware in New Zealand, I know this is what sets them apart. They help entrepreneurs and leaders turn success into significance. A great exit isn't just about the commas in your bank account. It's about what those commas allow you to create. Two Commas is proudly partnered with JB Ware, helping founders by putting their wealth to work for generations.
I just felt, one, I really enjoyed the nuance of digital advertising, and I start to get a really good appreciation for it. And I just went deep down the rabbit hole. And I don't know if it's an ADHD kind of slant on how I like to learn, but I just hyper focused and went really deep, and started having these conversations with agencies and wasn't getting the answers back that I wanted. And I thought, okay, well, maybe there's something here. Maybe there's no harm in us putting this on pause and us driving it ourselves for a bit and see how we go. And that for us was a real inflection point, because we knew the brand best. We knew what customer objections were. We knew how to leverage all of those assets within the business to drive acquisition. Very much a different landscape back then than what it is now for social media marketing. But Facebook was a real big, Facebook and Instagram was a really big acquisition platform for us, and just got better and better at that, to the point where I felt as though, why don't we just keep, that saying, you know, work on your weaknesses. Well, this was a case of just keep working on your strengths, like dive deep, go deeper, and really become dangerous at it, so we could continue scaling the business. And whatever we'd spend on a retainer would reinvest into ad spend. So really looked at bigger players out there in the market and engaged them to do one-on-one coaching and just get better equipped at the process, and haven't really looked back since, really, to be
Yeah,
honest.
yeah,
Yeah.
okay. So you went about the business of educating yourself in what was important. I'm imagining watching YouTube videos, buying Russell Brunson kind of books, that kind of thing. You got yourself a coach as well, is that right?
Yeah, yeah, it was, not how coaching typically works these days, but looking at your Ezra Firestones and guys like that back in the day. Russell Brunson with ClickFunnels was definitely material that got consumed. You hit the nail on the head there. But look, it's basic marketing principles through a digital vehicle at the end of the day, and just learning how to really spend media at scale smartly, so you're not burning ad spend and doing it at detriment to the
Mm.
business. So yes, that was a big part of it.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
very easy to throw money into a pit when it comes to marketing. I have an expression that I think that the role of the marketing manager in the modern organization, let's perhaps put e-commerce businesses aside because that's a very specific kind of niche set of skills. But if we talk about organizations in general, B2B is what we do a lot of in New Zealand. The modern marketing manager role is probably the worst job in that business. If we go back 20 years, it used to be the HR manager role because you had performance management, recruitment, health and safety, culture, all these things. Those have all been broken out into individual specialties these days. So you've got head of people and culture, head of health and safety, all these sorts of things. And so it's become a much simpler role. So now the modern marketing manager, I studied marketing at university more decades ago than I'm going to admit, but a long time ago. And we had the 5 Ps of marketing in those days. See if I can remember them: price, product, placement, position, and promotion. Thank you. Maybe performance, that came later. Then we went to the 7 Ps of marketing. Now I joke that it's the 22 Ps of marketing. And it's really, really hard to get across all of those things. But then you overlay with that some of the work that I do with my consulting engagements, which is to look at the organizational scope of the types of roles that we have across the business and ascertain whether it's expertise we need to have in-house or whether we can potentially offshore or outsource it to a third-party provider.
Mhm.
To get the benefit of bringing in expertise that we don't necessarily need to own and fractionalize it as well. And I have a really simple quadrant, which is that strategic importance on the y-axis and then the need for control on the x-axis. And so if it's of high strategic importance to us, i.e. is marketing of high strategic importance to us, and do we need to control where the money goes, have visibility of the performance, the analytics, all that sort of stuff. In this context, yes, then we absolutely must have that capability in-house. We can't outsource it. We can't we can't offshore, we can't bring in third-party businesses to supply that for us. If you go to the other corner, the bottom left-hand corner, low strategic importance and low need for control, then we can offshore it and bring in a much cheaper resource. So that's a really simplified view of
It's
the
really
world.
astute thinking.
Yeah, yeah. So the other thing that you picked, that you dropped in there a second ago was the PAS thing. Let's just talk about that for a second because there's perhaps a bit of a learning moment. So it was pain.
Pain, agitation, solution.
Yeah, okay.
Mm.
So if you're looking at a business in the work that you do now, how do you apply that thinking in terms of what they're trying to achieve from a marketing and an outcomes perspective? So utilizing that thinking.
Yeah, I think whenever you're trying to elicit an action from a user on whether it's a social platform or within your email list, whatever it might be, what you have to ask, what problem am I solving, essentially? Because unless your product or service solves a problem, it's going to be that much harder to sell it, essentially. So looking at your product or service and going, okay, well, what's the pain that my customer or prospective customer is experiencing right now? How do I illuminate that, press on that, and then present the solution? Now, sometimes that's all in the very same creative asset if it's direct response in nature. Sometimes that's a very long tail, and you might start with a particular piece of content that addresses the pain, and you take them on that journey and present the solution. Depends on path to purchase, depends on where you're using where you're using it in your media stack as well. But it's just it's a pretty proven technique, I think, where you've got an obvious villain, like I touched on in the meat box case, where people are frustrated with supermarket meat. They're frustrated with what they've got availability to, and they're paying through the nose to get it. So why not lean into that? Why not agitate that? That might not work for every product or service out there. It might be really disingenuous to do that for some brands, but there's certainly a place for it in marketing.
Mm. So 2017, funds from the house sale poured it into the business. What did your growth look like in those early days? So we all start at zero. So when did you hit the seven figures? When did you get to the $1 million of revenue? And then what did it look like after that?
Yeah, good question. Year one was pretty humble. It was probably like 50 grand is what we did. And it started very much from scratch. We had a friend who had a couple of CrossFit gyms. And at that time, CrossFit gyms were very much around Paleolithic diets, a lot of them. We want great quality meat, great quality vegetables, and so forth. And we started a meat menu, and it went out like you'd order your lunch at primary school. And we did the rounds, and we had it in vacuum sealed bags inside of plastic bags, and super, super humble beginnings. And then word of mouth traveled, and soon it was another CrossFit gym, another one. And then all of a sudden we virtually had all of them in Auckland. And then it was at that point we thought, okay, well, let's invest into a website. And we knew we wanted to do one, but let's actually invest into one. So we took everything we had, which at that time was about 12 grand, and put it into the worst looking WordPress site you've probably ever seen for a direct to consumer model. And we just persisted, and we iterated, and we learned. And after that second year, I think we're approaching the several 100,000 band. And then it kind of doubled. It just doubled year on year from there. I think shortly after that, we made the Deloitte Fast 50 because we cracked that 1 million, whereas it was under 500,000 the year before, and it just stacked on top of one another. We got to a point where in about 2018, we got to a point where we were managing a floor of butchery and pick pack staff and all the rest of it. And that's fine. And it was working. There was nothing wrong with that. But our ability to scale was going to be prohibited by trying to continue to manage that, as well as doing the media buying and digital marketing in-house. So again, taking that pragmatic perspective and going, what if we were to take a hit to our gross margin and actually push all of this upstream so we can focus on what we're good at? We're great at customer service. We're great at digital marketing and growth marketing. We're great at the fulfillment piece. Do we like tracking yields week in, week out? Do we like to make sure that we're keeping suppliers honest, and what we paid or what we agreed was actually what we paid on the invoice, and all of this noise and distraction? It was essential to the business, but it wasn't critical to scaling the business. So that was where we sat down and engaged all of our supply chain and went, hey, look, this is our growth trajectory so far. This is where we want to get to. Would love to partner with you to help us do that. We've got no interest in investing in, really CapEx initiatives like more machinery and equipment so we can increase our output. But you guys probably can. A lot of them had export already set up. A lot of them were doing a lot of the stuff on a big scale already. Our biggest concern was quality control, and then obviously, are you going to hold us in high enough regard where you're going to actually deliver to us on the parameters that we need to serve our customers? So that was a big opportunity for us to go, okay, cool. From a profitability perspective, here and now, we'll take a hit, granted, but it's going to improve our ability to scale because we can focus on less moving parts in the business. And that was a really critical moment, and we scaled aggressively on the back of that because it just reduced the noise in the business. And it was scary, hugely scary at the time, but it worked fantastically. And that next 2 years before we hit COVID was, yeah, it was really well-fueled growth.
Yeah, that's a really mature decision to make. So you were kind of nudging up towards $1 million, 7 figures of revenue. So you're starting to see some margin come through the business, but you've also got a lot of moving parts in the business as well, right? And so having the awareness to step back and go, what business are we really in? Are we in the fast-moving consumer goods, meat and produce business and the picking and the packing and all that sort of stuff? Or are we in the marketing and the customer success and fulfillment business? And you went, clearly the latter is the things that we need to excel at, provided we have sufficiently high quality partners and checks and balances, no doubt, that you had to put in place to make sure that your standards were maintained. Actually, that's a good question to dwell on. How did you ensure that the high standards, because as a happy customer, I can attest that you had very high standards and the produce was always amazing. It was well packed. You've talked about the unboxing experience as well. So what did you do to ensure that your standards were maintained by your partners?
We, in the process of sitting down with our suppliers, not every supplier probably left out. Not every supplier was quite so agreeable
Right.
in going down that route.
It wasn't successful from the outset. And
Exactly.
yeah,
Yeah. No, like that ain't our core business. We ain't touching it.
right.
There's too much opportunity for margin loss and things. We operate on a thin margin as it is. Go ask somebody else. And that was cool. That's fine. It's their prerogative. But what came out of that process is we actually had really good conversations with a handful of suppliers that were like, you know what? That is really cool. They could see where the future was in retail, and they were like, "Yeah, would love to partner with you guys. How can we do this where you guys are gonna have confidence it's not gonna let down quality and so forth?" So to answer your question, that process of going out, to our suppliers actually, rationalized down the suppliers that we went, "Actually would like to partner with you guys because you get it." You get the quality piece, you get the freshness piece particularly. It wasn't all just red meat, there's also poultry and things too. So there was that freshness to consider, and that can be hurtful to a business when you get it wrong, and they were taking a lot of the risk. So we appreciated that. So by process of having those conversations, we're like, supplier 1, 2, and 3, let's go all in. And by doing that, we narrowed our ordering in the sense that we didn't have, you know, 10 suppliers with 10 different POs. We had 3 suppliers with 3 much bigger POs than they were used to seeing. So immediately off the bat, they're like, "This is great. Our business with you has gone threefold. We've already got evidence that this is a good move." So they felt compelled, or at least that's the way we saw it at the time. They felt compelled to do right by us and make sure quality was held.
So we rolled into COVID, March 2020. None of us saw it coming in the way that it did. What did it do to your business?
It was nothing we could have ever expected. Yeah, it was a phenomenal period. Something I'll never forget, and it had some amazing moments, but it was also uh, some moments that almost broke you too.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, it was a time where you have to think also that, only businesses that were regarded as essential businesses could operate. So already you were operating on a lot more baseline capability than what you'd typically like to see if you were to scale up operations. We couldn't take on any staff. You were allowed to take on staff. But the positives were, because we had done such a good job of cornering the market um, going into 2020, is that when that happened, we just had a flood of traffic hit the website. Orders went through the roof. We thought about turning orders off, and we thought, let's just not. Let's just try and
Just see how
cater
we
to
do it.
everybody. Let's front foot it with our suppliers. Let's talk to NZ Post. NZ Post are like, we've hit our 2032 strategic capacity already. We have to turn off orders. And I was like, well, we don't want to turn off orders.
Mm.
Like, people aren't able to go to supermarkets. They want to come to us. We want to be able to facilitate that. How can we work around this? How can we go, you know what? We typically have you guys come and pick up pallets from us at X time in the afternoon. What if, because we've got so much demand coming in, what do we rationalize down our options so we can pick faster and get supplier product here faster, and you guys pick up earlier so it can go into the network sooner, so you've got visibility of everything. And they're like, okay, cool. Sounds good in theory. Let's give it a go. And it was a was just a daily grind of going, this worked, this didn't. We had one day where we had 20 odd $1,000 worth of products go missing in the network, and NZ Post like, hey, sorry guys, this is it's your exposure, not ours. And again, just working with them, they were fantastic through the process. I mean, they probably got so much bad press out of it, but in terms of our experience, they were just trying to do the right thing in what was a crisis situation, and were able to claw that back and meet in the middle and just continue serving the demand. Doing that meant that we had to do double shifts. We're virtually running, a 24-hour operation, staff morale, our morale. It was, it was really difficult, but wouldn't change it. It really makes you as a leader, as an entrepreneur. You're charging onto the battlefield and just hoping that everyone's behind you following. And you need to lead by example, stay strong. But in terms of revenue, just that the spike was crazy. We got featured on One News as well. That this was one place you could get your meat to. That about a week into COVID, so another spike again. And it was a phenomenal time. Yeah.
Approximately, what did that do to your kind of revenue rate as we came out of COVID? So you're well into the seven-figure range going into COVID. So 2021, 2022, what kind of runway were you hitting at that stage?
Yeah, that was 8-figure business territory.
Yeah.
Yep. We were high 7 figures going in, came out 8-figure territory,
Yeah.
and my big, I suppose, putting all of the emotion and everything that COVID was to the side, coming out of it, going, how do we maintain this run rate, or at least entrench all of these new customers that have found us, instead of just having it come in and go out, because what goes up quick comes down quick too. So really ironing out our processes on the back end. How do we have those retention flows with email and media, and even really manual things too, like trying to keep that personal touch to maintain that run rate. It tapered off, I'm not going to lie, but we're really thrilled with what we were able to maintain. We expected to lose a good proportion of the people that came in through that period, but we had a really good retention rate. And I think that was what was critical to a handsome exit as well, is the fact that we didn't just see the spike and it came down, which was a lot of businesses through COVID.
So many.
So for us to go up and have a slight dip but maintain, I think was, a big testament.
Yeah. Services companies particularly, and those that were in Wellington, especially Ben Foreman I had on the show maybe 6 months or so ago, and Restless Studios was his business, and they had a massive spike over COVID, and he had people come knock on the door and ask if he might be interested in selling. And as he said later on the show, so not speaking out of turn here, was that the dumbest thing that ever did was to think that was going to continue along the same vein, because the purchase orders evaporated and the budgets disappeared, especially when there was the change of government. So
there's a lot of tightening on the back of that.
A lot of tightening. So for you guys, you kind of saw a small reduction in your total revenue, but the growth rate obviously dropped right off. Is that right? Yeah.
That's right. Yeah. And I think that was a big motivator to, going into the 2022. The books had looked great going into COVID. They looked phenomenal throughout COVID, and they looked really solid coming out of COVID.
Yeah.
And it was at that time I said to Lise, my wife, I'm like, hey, look, what do you think about taking it to market? And she's like, that's the stupidest thing I've ever heard. It's a great business. Look at the lifestyle it gives us. Yes, it's been all of these kind of, particular defining difficult moments in our life early on, but look at what it's giving us now. It's a fantastic business. I said, look, if we look at the trend out there, if we can kind of look ahead of what's in front of us at the moment, things are going to taper off. Money was really cheap. Inflation is peaking. Like, there's going to be an adjustment here. There has to be an adjustment. So why don't we take it to market? Hey, worst case, we hang on to it. No one comes knocking on the door. Best case, it could be a life-changing, defining moment for us. So so that too was a really interesting phase. But I'm glad that we foresaw what did actually happen. I mean, Meatbox is still charging on strong as ever, which is great. But in terms of the market and how difficult it was to maintain that scale trajectory, those efforts, were hurt. on the back of that tightening, on the back of
Yeah.
coming to an end.
This is a phenomenal foresight. So are you kind of early 2023, you and Lisa are having this conversation, and then did you go out to market around about that time? Because it was 23 that you sold, wasn't it?
22.
22. Oh, even
Yes.
better.
Yeah.
Okay. So,
Yeah.
I mean, deal doing it reached its absolute zenith in about the middle of 2022. So 2020, everyone freaked out, ran for the sidelines. We all saw what happened with the stock market post lockdown period, but then it quickly rebounded. And by 2021, people were starting to do a whole lot of M&A activity because these businesses were thriving and money was super cheap. So, of course, let's go out and go shopping. And that continued through 2022. So approximately when and what was your first motion? How did you said take it to market. So what did you do to get it out there?
Yeah, good question. So towards the end of 2021, I remember the conversation distinctly. We'd taken some time out for a weekend in Papanui, and that's when you get those, blue sky thinking moments. And we just had some clear air, and I voiced it to Lise then, and that's when she said it was a ridiculous idea, but it kind of percolated, and she's got like, okay, well, what do you think it could sell for? And then you start having those conversations, going, this is how it could, impact us personally, because rightly or wrongly, I feel you're in business for an exit of some description at some day. You're not in it purely because it's a passion project and you want to do it forever, or at least that's not me. Some people it is. So
I
whether
say
that,
that you will exit this business one day. It's either by default or design, because either you get wheeled out and someone else will take the business over that you've left behind, or it'll be an intentional thing where you go through a structured sale process or someone turns up and makes you an offer you can't refuse. But you will leave that business one day, whether you like it or not.
yes,
Mm.
it's a far better way of framing it. So having to think about like what reality looked like post sale kind of started to percolate, and so on the other side of New Year, we started thinking, you know what, let's maybe just start having some conversations with brokers. Had a conversation or two, found one that I kind of landed on that I liked, and kind of got started on the process of, you know, going, this is what what's that?
I am information memorandum.
That's the one. IM looked like, and gave them the information. They presented it back, and I was like, "Oh, that's not us at all." I said, "Let me have a go at this." And so I wrote my version of an IM, and I said, "Here you go. Maybe just tweak that and see what you can do with it." I feel like that's strong. He goes, "This is fantastic. I'm just going to take this if you don't mind me doing that." I said, "Great." He presented 3 buyers a week later. One just loved the business, made an offer a week following that, and then we settled 3 months after that.
Wow, that is
Yeah.
phenomenal. So I'm just going to play that back again. So you had a average IM, so you rewrote it. That took a week. So by the time the broker got it, he turned up a week later with 3 potential
Yeah.
buyers. And then a week after that, you'd landed on a heads of agreement with the successful buyer.
That's right.
That is
Yep.
remarkable. And then 3 months of DD to get it to settlement phase.
Yeah.
Again, very rapid.
Yeah, settled by April.
Looking back on that now, and you probably have a sense that that is phenomenal. That's light speed kind of.
In hindsight, after I've spoken to business owners and things about exits, they're like, "Whoa,
Yeah.
should have asked some more."
So maybe, but why do you think it happened so quickly?
I think just like when you're selling a house, you just need one motivated buyer.
Mm.
And this was a case of that. I mean, we had 3 interested parties, and they were all asking great questions. But this guy in particular who purchased the business, he has a bit of an affinity for e-commerce. He likes e-commerce businesses. I think the cash flow side of it too. I mean, there's no hiding behind that. It's great from that perspective. Um, so he was a little bit further on that consideration journey than maybe others coming in who didn't already have a little bit of clout in the e-commerce space. And I think once he started seeing the numbers as well, was like, wow, these are phenomenal numbers. The other thing too that I think he really liked is his e-commerce businesses, they used NZ Post for the courier portion, and I probably should have touched on this earlier, but we brokered a perishable pilot program with NZ Post in the early days. Long story short, they're like, "There's no way we're sending chilled perishable product through our network where it can spoil. MPI audits us regularly. no way, not happening. So we went through the process of going, okay, how do we make this last more than they even need it to, and the integrity still be intact? So maintain that cold chain right the way through. And we organized for organic wool liners, packing it down with ice. And we put temperature thermometers in there, and we looked at how they plotted temperature from when they left us to being delivered, and we did that all throughout the country. So Alexandria on a 30-degree day versus Auckland on a cool 15-degree day, and then presented that data back and said, look, this is how it's actually performing. It's got legs. We'll take all of the exposure for anything that spoils within your network. And it meant that our attrition rate was like a 0.13. And his businesses had an attrition rate of like 10.3. So for every 10 orders that he sent out, one wouldn't make it to the customer, and he had to comp that. So by actually bringing his businesses in under this perishable code that the NZ Post ended up creating, it meant that he clawed back 10% of what he was forking out for overnight. So
Yeah, wow.
not only was it the business he bought on its own merits, it actually bring a lot of efficiency to those two other businesses he had.
That's what I would refer to as being a strategic advantage that you had at the meat box. Did you get that when you were going through the negotiation to buy, that you were going to bring something that would be demonstrably improving of his existing businesses?
Yeah, it wasn't until we were in conversations
Yeah.
that I realized he had that 10% attrition rate.
Yeah.
I was like, wow, one, how do you have a 10% attrition rate? How do you still
He's
scale
business.
profitably? And two, I was like, well, this is going to complement your business really well. So yeah, it did come into the thinking.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Mm. So, where did you land from a multiple, EBIT multiple perspective?
Yeah, yeah. So we ended up being a 5 multiple.
Oh, it's
Yeah.
great.
Yeah, yeah, which is great. And for me, like 5 multiple, when you compare it to like a, tech sales and software, those multiples are crazy high, but
They
got to,
were. No, not at the moment.
yeah, exactly. Yeah, good point. But this model, we had a really modest opening margin. We had to fight for everything to drive a double digit bottom line. So our opening margin averaged about 38%. Then we had to take out fulfillment and all of those other costs. By the time you strip that back, rather, you're struggling to, hold ground at 10% profit. So all it takes is a bad week or a bad day, and that gets gobbled up pretty quickly. So I think the other strength around the business was actually having really good processes in place where it took that exposure away. Supplier agreements, we ended up getting suppliers charging us on a per unit basis rather than weight. So if it was a 520 gram pack of meat instead of 500, they wore the 20 grams, not us. It's a death by a thousand cuts if you let that stuff slide. So I think keeping that really honest all the way down to bottom line was a big win. And I think that really contributed to that multiple that we saw.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's a great outcome. So 3 months until the deal was done. So we're talking kind of, let's call it, mid to late 2022. What did you do at that stage? Did you take some time out? Did you buy jets? So the last one's a joke, but what did you do, and what did you make that deal mean?
Yeah.
Acknowledging along the way, by the way, Rick, that you said that you view a business as an asset, which I think is the best way to look at a business, as opposed to it didn't have Agraval meats across the top, and you were identity kind of tied up as being part of the business. But what did you make it mean, and then what did you do subsequently?
First was consulting my wife. You build an identity over 7 years, building something from scratch. And for a sale to happen that quickly, that's like ripping the Band-Aid off really quick. Because her first question was, okay, if we do this, how long? I was like, babe, these things can take a year, sometimes more, which they can. And she was like, oh, okay, all right, a year. I can get my head around that. And then it all happened really quickly. And she just had this, as we both did, to be fair, like this just real loss of identity for a moment. We're like, whoa, like we've just got to kind of take a moment to just get grounded again. Took the opportunity, spent some time in Fiji, enjoyed the win, like really celebrated the win. We pretty much went 7 years without stopping and reflecting at what we had built, even prior to COVID, stopping and reflecting just, all of those wins along the way. So we did that. We came back. Uh, you mentioned, business as an asset. I'm not one for going and, yeah, like you say, buying all the toys and celebrating the win. I'd hate to sell it for what we did and then squander that. So I did the very boring thing of wiping the mortgage. We didn't just sell our house back in 2017 to invest into the business. When we got our next house, we took out a second lien against the house. You do all of those things in the spirit of, making the boat go faster, essentially. So we made a lot of sacrifice and took on risk there. It was an awesome feeling to wipe the mortgage and be freehold. That was number one. And then took that opportunity to invest into more property and expand our portfolio. Again, looking at we're young, this was before we were 40. We had our lives ahead of us. We don't need to try and, you know, have cash generating assets to live a very idle life. We've got plenty of years left. So, expanding our property portfolio rather, for the long game, for that 20-year horizon. So that's where we put a lot of it. Yes, did we drop a pool in at home and a few other things? Absolutely. Why not? You got to celebrate the
Yeah,
win. So it's balancing that. Yeah. So that's essentially what we did.
Yeah.
And then just took the time to, recalibrate, get grounded again, and then, take a pause before going for the next sprint, whatever that looked like at the time.
And so now you serve other e-commerce founders, and you have assisted people build businesses to realize $100 million of revenue. It's probably more than that now. That's a tag on your website. But what is it that you get up to these days, Rick? And what's the formula that you have behind that?
Absolutely. Yeah. I want to be to e-commerce founders what I wanted when I started.
I love that.
Yeah. Yeah. I would have loved someone in my corner who had walked the path before me, knew which buttons to push, because a lot of the time you're meandering, trying to figure it out. You don't know whether you're making the right call or wrong. There's a lot of gut involved, and sometimes that can be expensive. And sometimes it means you're not growing at the rate you need to. And a lot of businesses, let's be fair, don't make it. So with that being said, I want to empower uh, founders and business owners to go, actually, we're going to drive that capability in-house. We're actually going to drive media buying and and marketing in-house. We're going to actually be accountable to the P&L. We're going to align that to our marketing efforts. We're actually looking at, life cycle marketing and retention and going, how are we actually using our software stack to do that properly? What does email done well actually look like? And just giving them all of those tools so they can, one, do it themselves in-house, or know enough so they can outsource it to an agency or bring headcount in, but have ownership of that and understand how it works to scale the business. So that's how I help businesses now. I also work in a retained capacity when they're like, no, you do it. We're going to focus on our knitting. And that's been really rewarding. And it's been really not surprising, but it's been really pleasing. All of the things we've learned scaling the meat box. I've since scaled businesses after the meat box, and just actually realizing how much of a wealth of skill and I suppose ability to scale brands and see the patterns I have through that process than I otherwise would have thought. So that's been really cool to see, especially for a small business owner, then scaling their business from 500,000 to 1.2 mil is life changing. It gives them a lot of space. Business owners are losing sleep over, am I going to be able to pay the rent this week? Am I going to be able to take the kids to so and so? So taking that away is really cool, really rewarding. But then also doing it on a larger scale with brands that are doing those multiple seven figures is cool as well, because the principles are the same. Sometimes the execution's slightly different, but it's all a ton of fun at the end of the day, and that's what I'm up to these days.
Yeah, yeah. So, given you've gone through the full life cycle of being founder, scale, and then exit, and now you had some time out, and you're working with other founders in a advisory capacity, how's that kind of shaped and changed your perspective on business ownership and business growth?
Yeah, good question. I think a lot of people jump in because they have a passion for a product or a passion to fill a gap in the market, but they don't know what the commercial side of that looks like.
Yeah.
And often it comes later. And when it comes later, they're kind of forming it quickly and they're not getting the right advice. And that hamstrings the business, which might have great product market fit, might have great things going for it, but it might prohibit them expanding into, retail distribution and supermarket and things because they haven't built that baseline well enough themselves. So I think really giving that commercial lens is a big one, and that's what I've learned too. Is I came out of uni as an accounting major. I went and worked as an accountant for 3 years. So I take that P&L leaning and financial alignment probably a bit for granted. So helping business owners with that is probably one of the biggest things I've realized is actually a feather in the cap. That's what people often have as a blind spot, especially if they're hugely creative and we're really into their product. They're not thinking so much about that side of things, which, yeah, for me is been a big eye opener.
Yeah. So, forgive me for putting words in your mouth, but I just wanted to stress test this properly. So, if I was a wantrepreneur, as they call them in the positive sense, I wanted to get a business started, and I thought that e-com, drop shipping, serving customers through that methodology would be a good approach. Is the question that you are advocating people ask themselves is, what are the economics that sit in behind this? Is that kind of the thing that you're saying there? Or is it something slightly different? I'm looking for the core question that I should be considering answering for myself before starting or before scaling.
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head.
Yeah.
What do the unit economics look like if it's in an e-commerce context, or what do the economics look like generally otherwise?
Yeah.
A lot of business owners are shocked when they find out what your opening margin should look like to run a profitable, lucrative, cash flow generating business.
What should it look like?
For e-com, it needs to be 70% and
Wow.
above.
Okay.
Yeah,
So if you're selling it for a dollar, you need to buy it for 30 cents.
correct.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah, and a lot think 30, 40%. I did.
Yes.
You think 30, 40% is really good because it's a truckload more than a lot of wholesale margins. So, of course, that's great. But what you find is you scale slower because you can't reinvest enough back into the business to grow. Unless you've gone hugely viral and organically, you're absolutely popping off. But that's the exception, not the rule. If you are going to do it, in a methodical, well filled out way and scale into it, you need enough to reinvest in, and not understanding contribution margin and direct costs versus overheads is something that probably, yeah, just goes over a lot of early stage business owners' heads.
Yeah. If I think about services businesses, then classically the approach was that you needed to have kind of a third across your revenue range. So
Yep.
it's about a third for salaries, about a third for business growth and the mechanics of the business. So, marketing, leases, accounting, legal, all that sort of stuff. And then a third for profit. You never ended up with a third for profit. So you probably ended up with about, kind of 10 to 15%, depending on the scale of the business. Typically, the bigger the scale, the less the proportion was left available for profit, unless you managed to strike onto something phenomenal from a model perspective. So you've developed this, pretty deep expertise in how to find and acquire customers online. If you had to break your acquisition engine down to say its three core components, what would that look like, Rick?
Mm, good question. First and foremost is understanding how much you should be spending or can afford to spend on acquiring a customer, especially if it's cold prospect that you're acquiring for the first time, which tends to be the more expensive way, is going, okay, what is my contribution margin in my business? After I take out the cost of goods, those direct costs associated with getting the product out the door, what am I left with? And then actually going, all right, based on the number of times that that customer purchases over 12 months, what does that look like? And how much am I comfortable to spend as a proportion of that to go and acquire customers? Because then it tells you how much you can actually leave in your business to keep the lights on and keep the business running. That's number one. Number two is, okay, if I'm acquiring a customer and I am trying to define how much to actually invest into doing that, then what does the lifetime value look like over the greater term? Can my product or service support a lifetime value beyond 12 months where they're going to purchase more times? Yes or no? If you haven't been trading that long, what does it look like over 12 months? And make some educated assumption around what that looks like, because that is going to determine how aggressive you can be. If they only purchase once, you need to be profitable on first purchase acquisition, which is a really difficult thing to do. And that's why I really enjoy working in the consumable space, because we've got more to work with there. People come back and purchase again if you do it right. And then the other thing to consider is how you're actually treating prospects that are already in your world. Email is hugely overlooked. People consider email as something that they maybe broadcast out to once a week, keep people up to speed on what's been happening with the brand or product, but it is a marketing tool to bring people from that consideration or just being made aware to a paying customer. So looking at how they segment their uh, subscriber list and going, okay, for people who have come into the list and haven't actually made a purchase, what kind of comms am I sending to them so I can help amortize that cost that it took me to bring them into the list in the first place? Because yes, people are going to make their way onto your list organically, but for the most part, you're paying for them to get there. So how are you actually nurturing them through to a sale in the quickest way possible, without having to discount too aggressively to make that happen? And those three things combined make for a really capable acquisition engine. If you're doing those things in silo and they're not talking to one another, it's pretty easy to get pretty loose and not have a real good understanding on what every acquisition dollar is doing within your business. And then you're looking at your P&L going, why aren't I all that profitable? Or why aren't I scaling at the rate I need to be? So those are probably the three big ones.
I understand from afar that e-commerce businesses are best run when you have a really keen eye on the analytics, because you live and die by the margins across various things. And I'm from a SaaS, software as a service background, and so the last 20 odd years. And so I take for granted the analytics that we have in that industry, we collectively have developed, and LTV, lifetime value of a customer, CAC, customer acquisition cost, and then CAC recovery, which is the time it takes you to win back the money that you have spent to get that customer based upon the revenue. Yeah, payback period is what you call it. So I'm really pleased that those are metrics that you're bringing into your customers.
Oh, I appreciate that. Thank you.
I've learned a lot from about the e-commerce business. I've loved how you've approached the you've brought some maturity of business thinking to your first business that I wouldn't have ordinarily anticipated from someone that was going through a relatively short period of start, scale, and sell, particularly around the working with partners to fulfill things that we didn't want to do in-house, the maturity to bring the capability in-house around marketing, which business are we really in, and then also the engine aspect of running a business, the machine, the system that you've got in behind the scenes, such a great way to approach these things. So how do people find you, Rick? So if someone's out there with an e-com business or with a B2C business and they're going, this guy sounds really interesting, how do people find you?
I am playing in LinkedIn quite a lot lately, so that's probably the best place to come find me. Or if you want to get in touch more directly, check out my website, Rise ecommerce.
Rise e-commerce. Okay, excellent. My parting question, Rick, always is there's an alternate universe and there's another Rick Agraval that's in that universe. He has a different career. It's a deeply satisfying career. What is that career?
Hands down, fighter pilot. It has to be fighter pilot.
Amazing.
Yeah, it's got the adrenaline, it's got the nuance of all of the things that need to be just right to get all of that thrust and acceleration and adrenaline. But sadly, and this is probably why it's such a aspiring thing in an alternate universe, is I'm colorblind. So you can't be a pilot if you're colorblind. So that was kind of ripped away early on when it was my dream as a kid. So that's something that's always stuck with me. I'd love to be a fighter pilot.
Robbed, future maverick. I mean, you got a bit of a maverick look going on anyway, so.
Yeah, good boy. Appreciate that. I think that's a compliment.
It's a great point.
To get into Scientology or something. But yeah, that Top Gun, like captivated the whole,
generation. And then again with the second film, so phenomenal.
Yeah, and it was done well. So yeah, it's probably it for me.
Sounds good. Rick, thanks so much for coming on the show.
Appreciate it, Josh. Appreciate you having me on and telling my story.
Love it. Thanks for listening to the show. If you've enjoyed it, and if you've gotten this far, you definitely have, then I reckon you should go and check out a copy of my book. It's available on my website or Amazon.com. There's an Audible version as well. And it's a blend of personal insight and experience on what it takes to build and sell a company. It's not a how-to guide. You can go to ChatGPT for that. I've had some wonderful unsolicited feedback from people, but I did ask some folk for it, and here is one of the bits of feedback that has come from one of the early readers. Josh has created something rare, a guide that's both deeply practical and genuinely wise. His writing is punchy, clear, and feels like sitting across the table from someone who's been through it all and knows exactly what you need to hear. This is the resource every founder needs when facing the biggest decision of their professional life. Honest, actionable, and completely grounded in reality. That's from Susie McAlpine, who is herself a best-selling author and a speaker and business advisor. Please go check out a copy available on the website. Thanks for listening.